For these morning sessions. So while everyone is finding their seats, I will very No, it's fine because he's going to use this, so it's easier, I think, for Walsinder to just sit there. Yeah. Thank you. So it is a great pleasure to welcome you to the second day of the conference. And as you can see, we managed to do something right yesterday. The heavens is opened. I'm pretty sure it is my faux pas in the morning about the yellows and the browns. So I'll take all credit, actually, and not the conference. So it's a great delight to invite my dear colleague, Professor Sophie Oldfield, who is a professor in urban studies at ACC and also linked to the University of Basel, to invite her to chair this morning's session. Thanks, Sophie.
So thank you very much. The session today is on the vitalities of everyday life in Congo, and I need to give two apologies first. Achille Mbembe had to give his apologies, and Sami Balogi also had to give his apologies. So I have stepped in to chair, and we have Philippe Dubuc, who I will introduce in a second, presenting, and Alcinda Homwana as a discussant. So it gives me great pleasure to introduce somebody who's very well known to all of us, Philippe Dubuc, who is a professor of anthropology at the Institute of Anthropological Research in Africa at the Catholic University of Leuven in Belgium. Philippe Dubuc has theoretical interests and expertise on youth and the politics of culture, on urban infrastructure, on transformation and private and public spaces in urban contexts in Africa and in Congo especially, and is an author of many books and many important pieces of work. So with that very brief introduction, I'd like to introduce him and invite him to come up to speak.
Thank you very much. First of all, let me start by thanking Edgar and all the people of the ACC to have invited me. It's a very special place, and I'm very happy that it exists, and I've always felt very part of the family, even from afar. So, secondly, as you might have seen in the program, and as Sophie told you, I was supposed to give this presentation together with this guy, Sami Balogi, a Congolese photographer and a good friend, and we've collaborated very closely together for the past 5 years, a collaboration that resulted in this book that I'll talk a little bit about, and also an exhibition that is currently touring. And Sami and I had crafted this presentation in a way so that I would be, so to speak, his sidekick, and he would speak out, but unfortunately his mom passed away last week, and so he had to rush to Lubumbashi and couldn't be here, and he apologizes for that, and so you will have to stick with me. Okay, but I've always been interested in the kind of the border zones between academic research, anthropology in my case, and the arts, and especially photography or film. And so it's a kind of collaborative work that I've started doing a long time ago already with this first book, Kinshasa Tales of the Invisible City, with a Belgian photographer at the time, Marie-Françoise Plissard. And I think of it as a kind of a vertical book. It tried to plunge into the city, beyond its architecture, beyond the hardware of its built form, to look at the city or analyze the city as a mental state of landscape, a state of mind. Now, the work I've been doing with Sami actually proceeds from the opposite direction. We've consciously tried to create not a kind of vertical look into the city and its imaginaries and so on, but to stick very close to the material landscape, the physical landscape, the infrastructure, and to write or photograph horizontally, narrate the city in a kind of horizontal way. So that doesn't mean that we don't look at the vertical, the different historical layers, for example, that have made up the urban presence that we looked at, especially in Kinshasa, the capital of the Democratic Republic of Congo, but also other towns and cities in Congo and elsewhere in Central Africa. So we've also tried to keep that historical layeredness in mind. And Sammy in particular, and since he's not here, I will say a little bit about his photography for him. He's always been a photographer who has been very attentive to that historical layeredness, and in his artistic work, his art is basically about how different times convert into the space of the now. And so he's rightly famous for these photo collages like the one you see here, where the presence of various past is rendered, and as they try to unravel the palimpsests of the city. And so in this sense, I see his work as a collecting and recollecting of urban pasts in the present and the possible futures one can inhabit from that point on. And so our horizontal exploration of the cityscape is basically became also a kind of topographical study, and we proceeded from two different vantage points or topographies, namely the mountain, kind of vertical proposition, and the whole. And this was pre-Trump. And you could say that Sammy has always been, in a way, a photographer of post-colonial holes, artisanal mining sites in his home province of Katanga. I myself have had a long-standing interest in various kinds of holes, ranging from diamond mining sites to graveyards to potholes as the city's generic infrastructure. So in this short presentation, I would like to stick to these two figures, the mountain and the hole, to build up a certain kind of visual and narrative of the city. Why the mountain? You can draw mountains, and Kinshasa is built along the Congo River, so it's surrounded by hills and mountains. And all of these mountains tell you something about the various histories of the city pre-colonial. Many of these mountain tops were important places for ancestral worship, important political spaces where the original land chiefs of what later became Kinshasa built their villages and so on. These mountains were then recolonized, as this one, called Konzo Ikulu, the very first mountain with the most important land chief when Stanley arrived in 1882. And Stanley planted his flag there and rebaptized that hill, that mountain, as Leopold Hill. And Leopold Hill later became, under Mobutu, was rebaptized again and given the name of Mont Galiema after the early land chief that was wiped out by colonization. So these mountains, each of these historical periods thinks like a mountain in a way. It tells you something about forms of sovereignty, forms of control, domination, colonization, territorialization. And you also see how these mountains then translated into another kind of vertical proposition, how the mountain as a colonial form of domination is translated into the form of the tower or the skyscraper. This one is the very first skyscraper that was built 10 stories high in what was then still Leopoldville in 1946, the first skyscraper in Central Africa. And it was then a source of pride. It meant that Congo, the heart of Africa, had been taken up in the history of modernity. It was like living in Black Belgium, or Black Europe as it was called, Poto Mwindo. So it was a source of pride, both for the colonizer, as a sign of the success of the colonization, and for the colonial subject in itself. And that vertical proposition then was also, like the mountains, reused and resampled. Mobutu built a more imposing one right next to the colonial tower. this one. And the vertical proposition continues to inspire dreams about the better city, the kind of neoliberal, specular cityscapes that we see in Dubai and Doha and so on, and how they will land in a place like Kinshasa. This one, for example, is one that is not built yet. It's supposed to come up in Lubumbashi. It's a gift from Kabila to his people, of a gift that is not much appreciated at this moment. And the building itself is called Hypnosis. So this kind of so this kind of imagination of this modernity, the neoliberal capital that will land in Congo, that is translated through these images of the vertical, and it is also recycled. This is another proposition that is actually being built in Kinshasa, although it doesn't look anything like this. But the idea of the tower that is also locally recycled. A large part of the work I did with Sami was a kind of ethnography of this particular tower, 12 stories high, built by a medical doctor. He calls himself a medical doctor of aeronautics and spatial medicine, whatever that may mean in the Congolese context. And so, he built it without architects. He started in 2003. It will remain unfinished. There's no water, no electricity, and so on. But it's a kind of a proposition. It's a city within the city. So for him, it embodies everything that the city should be. It's got restaurants. It's got a hospital. It's a church in it. There's all kinds of things. It's made for tourists. It's about control. It's about safety. So it's a programmatic statement of the city. So we've been exploring all of these sites. And the fascination that people still have for this kind of colonialist modernity in a way. At the same time, of course, the reality in the lives of people in most of Congo's urban landscapes is far removed from that shiny tower. Instead, the landscapes look like erosion sites and potholes. And so you have the mountain, how the pre-colonial, the colonial mountain became the post-colonial whole, is in a way the voyage that we have tried to make and to understand what is going on. And I would propose that the whole, and you can talk about different kinds of holes, Libulu in Lingala, watch out for the hole, someone said here, near a pothole in the street. So you have physical potholes that appear everywhere, that even inspire local artists for performances around potholes in the street. But you also have erosion sites that appear everywhere and that pose a huge problem to the city, that is built on sandy hills and that easily so roads and houses easily wash away. This is the main access road from the Atlantic Ocean to Kinshasa, the main line for food and commodities to come into the city, and it was washed away a couple of months ago. There's the hastily buried people and graves and holes in unmarked grave sites and cemeteries and so on. And there is the informal economy that people locally also refer to as Wenzeya Libulu, the informal market, the whole world of economic informality and shadow economies that people have to live in. So all of that is covered by the idea of the whole. Here you have a nightclub called the Big Hole, the Grand Libulu, because it was built right next to this first colonial skyscraper, the Tour Forestcom. And so next to the tower, you had the post-colonial hole with a typical Kinshasa answer: if we have to live in a hole, then we can as well dance in it. And this dancing became very successful, and a second one was opened up elsewhere in the city. And by now, the Big Hole has become a generic name for bars, nightclubs, and so on. So living in the hole, what does it mean? And actually, I started thinking about holes through Sonny Laboutancy, who one of his first theater plays that was never performed and was only published posthumously after his death is called Le Trou, the hole. And so there he philosophizes about the hole and what it means. And the whole there is used as a trope to think about the human condition in Kinshasa and by extension Central Africa. And the whole there I would say, has become a local master trope, a conceptual figure to express the dismal quality of urban living in the post-colonial city. And holes, in a way, can be seen as both a symptom and metaphor for an experience of loss that is simultaneously material, but also moral. So the hole is also used as a language to talk about moral erosion that itself signifies, beyond the physical decline of the city, also informs discourses about corrosion of wealth, of value, and so on. But even if holes have emerged as Kinshasa's generic type of infrastructure, as well as a kind of meta-concept to reflect upon the degradation of colonial infrastructure, and to reflect upon the closures and the impossibilities that the cityscape imposes upon people, the question is how to fill that gap between the colonial mountain or the skyscraper and the post-colonial hole. How do people fill that on a daily level in their own experience? And how can you turn these mountains, these holes, how can they be illuminated and taken out of the shadow to become towers again? We should remind ourselves that discourses of holes, which imply removal and the empty spaces it produces, that discourse perhaps is also problematic, and Trump's discourse reminded us of that, in that it suggests that urban existence is solely defined by depletion, as if the process of extraction processes of extraction were not themselves productive in any sense beside the depletive. And indeed, the hole is never just a black hole. It's never merely hollow or emptied of content. Holes also have the capacity to metaphorically elide how life continues through and often even despite decline. And even if living the experience of the whole considerably complicates life and often degrades its quality, the whole itself also offers, I would say, an opening, a possible aperture, a possibility, at least for those who know how to read an alternative meaning into the blackness of the whole. And so I've come to think of holes also as a kind of suturing points. The whole is the city's baseline, it's ground zero, and in that sense the whole perhaps is also a suture. In a recent publication, the historian Nancy Rose Hunt, who wrote beautiful books about medical colonial histories in Congo, wrote this little booklet called Suturing New Medical Histories of Africa. And she uses that concept of the suture to join together in new ways different colonial medical histories. And suturing, she argues, suggests not only closing a wound, making an incision, or stitching together parts, locations, and points of view. And as such, it points to new kinds of creativity with sources, with evidence, with interactivity. And so I've picked up on that idea and extended the notion of suture as closure, as junction, as seam, to the ways in which, often against all odds, the urban residents of Congo cities read meaning into the black hole and use material, but also mental and moral holes as suture points to fill the gaps, to overcome the impossible circumstances of living in the kind of urban environment that Congo offers. And so, taken like that, the notion of suture remains close to the original meaning of the term given to it by Jacques-Alain Miller, one of Jacques Lacan's co-disciples, who first introduced the concept of suture in Lacanian psychoanalysis. And for him, the suture is always between zero as a lack, as something impossible to conceptualize, and zero as a number. So therefore as something, as one. So zero is a zero, but it's also a presence, it's also a figure, it's also a one. In that sense, the whole is a suture, both represents lack, while also placing and suturing it. And so how to read possibility into what is impossible, how to see the content in the zero. And as this photograph says, l'impossible n'est pas congolais. The impossible is not Congolese. So in every impossibility, there is a possibility in a way, something that opens up. So in that sense, the tropes of the whole and the suture tell us something about the changes that have taken place in how urbanity is imagined and lived in Congo, where nothing is impossible. And that leads us to this, and it's a quote by Latour. I don't know whether we need to invoke him here, but hey, here he is, all of a sudden. What sort of collective life and what sort of knowledge is to be gathered once modernity has been thrown into doubt, while the task of finding the ways to inhabit remains more important than ever. And so this for me is precisely the sort of question that needs to be explored, if the notion of the whole offers a kind of meta-concept that people use to reflect upon both the material degradation of their city and to rework the closures of life in the city. Then the question is how this reworking is done, how that reassembling takes place. If the city is transformed into a zero world or a black hole, then that makes any clear assessment of what it is, what the city is about, sometimes simply disappear into the gravity, the force of its gravity. How then can this whole be reworked to remain or become the animated space that enables living and living together? And since we're name dropping, there's another one. Vivre ensemble, living together, and as Derrida, in a beautiful text at the end of his life, which he wrote about the Palestinian question, about living together. What does living together mean? Living together can only exist where the assemblage is not fully formed and is not closed. And so it's never closed, but what living together always implies a contestation about how a social body, a collective, completes itself. It's a process that indeed is never finished, it never sums up, it's never fully identical with itself, it's all constantly at work. And with that, an entirely new set of questions really emerge. How can we cohabitate with you? Is there a way to survive together? With none of our contradictory claims and interests and passions. They're all there, they cannot be eliminated. And these are questions that relate to any urban context, of course, but they seem to be particularly urgent in a city such as Kinshasa, where the gap between the topographies of mountain and whole is so conspicuous, and where pleasure and pain always go hand in hand, and where the hiatus itself has become the topological framework to map out any existence in the city. And so, so what we've then tried to do, and I don't know how I'm doing on time, I probably should stop here, but I still have 5 minutes. So what we've tried to do then is to design, Sammy and I, a way to build up in an alternative way an archive of the city, how to archive that reality, that urban reality. And I call it urban acupuncture, sticking our analytical, ethnographical, photographical needle into specific spaces that we've carefully chosen. It can be a field, an old building, a market, a cemetery, all kinds of the street, a pothole, all kinds of spaces around which we construct small ethnographies in a way. And the idea, the notion of acupuncturing came to me because of the work of Sami with another famous Congolese artist, the choreographer Faustin Lignekula. And the two of them did a video piece together years ago called Mémoire, Memory, where Faustin dances in the post-industrial landscapes of Katanga's mining sites. and where he literally almost uses his body as a dancer to acupuncture space. He uses his body as a kind of acupunctural needle, and in what he thinks reflects on as a geochoreography to, in a way, reposition spaces and places and realign them, reassemble them through this acupuncturing dance choreographic movements. The idea of urban acupuncture, of course, also comes from the weak architecture movements, Jaime Lerner, de Sola Morales, and so on, who, by tiny little careful interventions in the city's tissue, try to improve the city in itself. So both Faustin's work and the work by these architects is a kind of healing or therapeutic intention, which I do not share at all in a way. So it's far from me to want to improve the city as it is, but I want to. What I like is the very kind of attentive attention and careful way of dealing with existing urban tissue, and so it helps you to break the city open and to explore certain spots, to drill that needle, which is also a kind of test drilling across the historical layeredness of each space in the city, and how then to, like a needle that you stick into a body and it ramifies out through the nerve channels, how from one place to the next you can then start to tell and narrate the city horizontally and build up. Vaijanti was talking about scale yesterday, how to cover the scale of the city and how to bring various scales, specific tiny little places together in a larger narrative. So that's what we've tried to do in a way, and we're continuing to work on that at the moment. So I think I'm going to stop here and give the floor to the discussant. Thank you.
Okay, thank you so much. It gives me great pleasure to introduce our discussant, who is Alcindor Homwana. Alcindor works as an interregional advisor on social development policy at the United Nations and is a professor of anthropology and international development at Open University. Her work engages with questions of post-colonial conflict, youth politics, social movements, political protest, very interesting work on temporalities, and she's actually the perfect person to be a discussant as somebody who's worked very closely with Philippe, and together they have authored a book some of you might know, which is Makers and Breakers, Children and Youth in Post-Colonial Africa. So with that said, please come and join us, and we really would like to hear your comments.
Thank you very much. Through contrasting topographies of mountains and towers in colonial times, and sinking ground and holes in the post-colony, Philippe and Sami Balogi take us on a journey to try and understand urban life in the city of Kinshasa today and grasp the urban, or what the urban means in such a complex post-colonial context. The disillusionment with mountains and towers and the reality of garbage piles leads Kinshasa residents to describe the daily lives in the cities, or their daily lives in the city, as a whole, or libulu in Lingala. The whole expresses the wretched space of the city, the potholes, the ravines created by rains and soil erosions, but also holes that represent the informal economy, the meager livelihoods, the declining urban infrastructure, and the chaos of daily life. The whole is both physical and imagined. It powerfully represents the whole of the graves in the cemetery in the same way It represents the city as the cemetery of the living. Therefore, the metaphor of the hall expresses how Kinshasa residents ascribe meaning to material, mental, moral, and emotional everyday life challenges. As the authors point out, halls have become potent local tropes by means of which Congo's urban residents encapsulate their experience of living in what they often describe themselves as a multi-crisis. But the halls are not just expressions of decline, decay, and despair. The hall constitutes also an opening in the dark or blackness that generates opportunities for creativity, inventiveness, and improvisation. This resonates with the experiences of the young people I worked with in several African cities, Maputo, Dakar, Johannesburg, and Tunis, who described the extemporaneous and precarious nature of their urban lives. For example, young Mozambicans use the Portuguese expression desenrascar a vida, or hick out a living, and young Senegalese and Tunisians use the French word débrouillage, or making do, and young South Africans said, we are just getting by. The idea of desenrascar a vida, or débrouillage, or even getting by, situates their urban experiences in the realm of improvisation, or making it up as you go along, and entails a conscious effort to assess challenges and possibilities. Like the Kinshasa residents, these young urbans operate as Lévi-Strauss's bricoleur, a jack of all trades who manipulates and takes advantages of circumstances whenever possible to attain specific goals. Their actions also look like Michel Dissertaux's tactics, or daily struggles that respond to immediate needs rather than long-term strategic ends. The young urban dwellers discover and invent new ways of existing in the margins. These have been the experiences of young people who engage in street vending, cross-border trading, and smuggling, those who end up in criminal networks as swindlers, traffickers, and gangsters. Some engage in relationships with sugar daddies and sugar mamas for money, gifts, and others become successful entrepreneurs, repairing electronic devices, making and marketing clothing and jewelry, doing hair and nails, creating new artistic forms, musical performance, making graffiti, painting murals, writing blogs, and becoming savvy internet users. Indeed, the book's narrative and Balogi's photographs takes us through urban sites that are stitched together or sutured, making visible the connections between them, rendering visible the often elusive ways in which urban people engender new coping strategies to survive and make the best of the ever-changing circumstances. The photographs depict a city that is vibrant, colorful, and alive, despite its declining infrastructure, disorder, and degradation. And the writing compels us to dig in deeper, to reinterpret the darkness of the whole, to discover the joys and sorrows, the dreams and the tangible struggles as people attempt to make sense of life in the hollow city. By connecting the dots between these different wholes as suture points to fill gaps, Kinshasa residents creatively strive to transcend their bare existence by imagining new ways of being, by bringing to the fore contested narratives and contested histories, and by building dreams of a shared future. Ultimately, the holes and suture points reveal the multiple ways urbanity is imagined and lived in Kinshasa today. The book and Balogi's work is firmly grounded within the literature on the southern turn in urban studies, and it pushes us to expand the ways we see, interpret, and understand the urban in contemporary Africa. Thank you very much.
Okay, thank you very much. So we have about 20 minutes, maybe even a little bit more, for comments and questions. Yes, and actually, Alcinda, do you want to come up as well? And I think if you both offered some lovely material to engage with. Okay. So, comments and questions. Anybody want to get us started? Great. What we'll do is we'll collect around. Let me...
My name is Andresa. I'm from the University of Oxford, and thank you so much, Philippe, for your presentation. I think it's also Latour that says that anthropology makes things that apparently stand still move. So we see buildings, but then we see who created the buildings and how life is, whether photography is the opposite in a way, because it makes things that are moving stand still. And I find it very beautiful how you combine anthropology and photography, and suddenly the picture seems to be moving and the buildings can suddenly stand still, and it's very beautiful. But one thing that I want to discuss a bit is this idea of this dream of modernity and post-colonialism associated to the verticalization, to the buildings, because I'm from a city that perhaps has dreamed this idea of modernity and post-colonialism. I'm from Brasilia in Brazil, and I lived there most of my life. And I think, yes, the modernity of Brasilia and the buildings perhaps seems to be a picture of a failure. And I know James Holston might be somewhere in this room, and I don't say anything wrong, but one of the things that people believe that is a failure in Brazil is not so much the buildings and its modernity dream, but how the buildings don't accommodate enough people. So in a way, it's not how vertical the city is, but how not enough buildings it has built. And if you think about, I don't know, cities like São Paulo that is extremely vertical and perhaps is also considered a very ugly city, it might still be more democratic than the city of Brasilia.
Okay, so we've got a wealth of interesting methodological and political and broader questions there. Shall we could give our speakers a chance to engage, or if other people have comments or questions they want to add in. Okay, let's give you a chance to respond to that.
Okay, maybe I'll just stand. Yeah. It's easier. Yeah, so let me try to find an image that I haven't shown. These are pictures, by the way, of Kinshasa's land chiefs, who still play a very important role, although they're not recognized by the state or by the city as in official terms, but they still play a very important role for the expansion of the city. So we try to document their histories and their ongoing presence in the city as well. But the picture I was looking for was this one. So that dream of modernity in terms of skyscrapers and so on. So it's something that continues to have a great appeal, that makes people dream, that makes people even proud to be Congolese. And so certainly in 2006, for the first time in 50 years, there seemed to be the generation of a new urban plan, a kind of a Marshall Plan, urban plan for Congo, with Kabila and the first presidential elections under the name Les Cinq Chantiers, the 5 public works, including infrastructure. And so between 2006, 2010, a lot of things were not exactly built, but at least were shown, and that was going to happen. So our dreams of yesterday, today reality, to tomorrow a better future, it said. Afterwards, the five public works, the Cinq Chantiers, were rebaptized as the Revolution of Modernity, with huge banners and posters in the city, generating a lot of discussion because people started to wonder, what does revolution mean? What is modernity? What are they talking about? But it came with all of these images of the new buildings that were supposed to come up. This one, for example, was called the Modern Titanic. It's actually built next to the Forest Gump Tower in the shape of a boat, and it was going to be a new conference center. In the meantime, they've given it a different kind of name, but it made people dream of boats sailing off into the distant, on the horizon, and into the future, and taking Congo up again in the history of a more global community. And of course, we know that the Titanic sank, and so it's rather ironic that they named that building like that. And that's exactly that. Everybody knows in a way that this is not really going to be built or really going to be happen, but yet the attraction of it remains, even for those who know they'll never be part of these buildings once they come up, or these gated communities or the new cities. So in reference to Brasilia, and maybe I should, Jim is here, he wrote a whole book about it, he knows much more than I do, but it seems to me that that kind of the modernist dream of building the new city from scratch, a dream that it's a rare breed, but the few architects and urban planners that Kinshasa has, that they share. This city should be abandoned. We're going to start elsewhere, anew. And but contrary to Brasilia or Chandigarh, or that had a kind of a philosophy of inclusion in a way, that notion of inclusion is totally lost on the Congolese government. And so they replay in a way geographies of exclusion that were already written into the city from its very start. The colonial city of Kinshasa was a very segregated city, and partly also served as a model for the apartheid towns and cities here in South Africa, but between a white heart and a peripheral African cité, living quarters. And so, and that geography of segregation, and with a tangible color bar at the time, worked to some extent very well. And so it's being replayed. The new city that is going to be built, Cité du Fleuve, in the middle of the Congo River, will be for the happy few, and the rest of the city is basically relegated or redefined as non-city or as urban periphery. And so it's not inclusive at all, but still, everybody knows these places will not be for me. I'm not going to belong to it. But at the same time, it still makes you dream. The sheer aesthetics of it is so powerful that it makes you believe in a kind of distant utopian urban future that is going to be constructed. Sorry.
Open up a few more questions. Yeah. Okay, so we have a few more hands. If we start with you, and then we'll go. Yeah, we're going to collect these 5. We start with Jamte.
Hi, Philip. This is a question actually about photography and anthropology. And I know that in other presentations I've heard you speaking about the way that photography and the construction of the modern city are very intimately related. I was wondering if you'd just speak to how your work with Sami, in that conjunction between photography and anthropology, is different or similar to, or what are the continuities and differences between that moment and in the past you refer to Walker Evans and various other photographers who actually made the modern city appear, and the work that you're doing with Sami.
So we're going to collect a few. If you want to jump in now as you have the mic. Great.
Thank you. I'm Winnie Mitula. When I listen to your narrative, is the people are making do and they have no strategic long-term perspective. The governments are having visions and strategic way to go, and the scholars are interrogating all those different perspectives. So is there a window of this, because the people are the most critical in the current dispensation of development. Everybody is struggling to ensure that there is sustainable development and there is resilience and all that. But in this narrative, the people are making just do. They have no long strategic plan. Governments have medium, long-term, even 2063 visions. Is this all a contradiction? Because since yesterday, we are having these three parallel discussions, even in sessions, where the people have their own way, governments have their own way, maybe the global perspective has its own way. But I think your narrative is good because it's dealing with the people, and the people seems to be the center of the discussion now in the current dispensation.
Okay, we're going to collect two more, and then we'll give you a chance to answer.
Okay, thank you. My name is Jocelyn Vokuma. I'm from Burkina Faso. I'm an anthropologist. So I'm very proud of all of your presentation, both presentations. And what I want to know is, by urban acupuncture, do you mean that cities are ill? And for the second presentation, when you talk about Claude Lévi-Strauss, about débrouillardise, you check a French concept. I want to add by telling that there are new concepts which global, all of the one you talk about is in, what we call in French invention jugaad. It's from India and used by a researcher in Silicon Valley at US. And it means do best with a few. It's a new concept which exists, and global all detail you give from your presentation is just a contribution. Thank you, and I was very. It was a pleasure for me to hear you.
Great, thanks, Philippe. My question is about the suturing metaphor, and I just wondered whether you're taking something specific from the psychoanalytic move around suturing to map onto empirical processes. So what are the kinds of processes of suturing that one might look for in the city, particularly, specifically?
Okay, now I have to remember where we started with Vijenti on photography very quickly. Yes, I think it's for me it's very difficult to think or to try to tell something about the city without visualizing it. And photography and the city, they go hand in hand. I mean, the city would not have existed without photography and vice versa. And most of the classic photographers from New York to Kinshasa, indeed, I mean, they formatted the images that we have very often of New York, of Paris, of all of the places, are photographic images made by Cartier-Bresson, by Walker Evans, or by others. And so they go hand in hand. Now, I think photography has this capacity to, it's something of the surface, of course, so that's in a way what we've been doing, Sami and I together, literally covering the surface of the city, and at the same time, it also has the capacity to grant access to an interior and to open up I think it was Walter Benjamin who called it an optical unconsciousness, that's why so many photographs of the city are nocturnal photographs, are about the night, and the night is of course a very important time space in the existence of the city. So we've tried to work with that. Having said that, I think Sami, I forced him to do a kind of documentary photography that he, in his own artistic praxis, he has left behind, and the photograph is still a starting point for him, but it no more than that, and then it becomes something else. It becomes much more conceptual, or he builds other things out of that. And so I think in the work that we start actually next week in Congo together, we're gonna try to develop that more and take it into different directions. This is still very classical. It's about text, it's about photographs, and I think there's much more to be done, and to open up that genre of the monograph in this, or the exhibition, and you can really take it much further, and I think we really would like to explore that further. Now, the second question was about the government and the people, and sorry? Dreams and deprivations. It's of course a very important question, which should be, we should think about beyond the context of Congo, which at the moment is a very specific and a very strained and difficult one. As you know, there is a lot of street protests and demonstrations going on against the president, who should have stepped down more than a year ago now, and who refuses to go. So this is a particular moment of a lot of political upheaval. And I've always wondered, and since there is someone from Burkina, apparently, why Congo doesn't have the evolution that Burkina had, and why the Burkinabe president was ousted, and why that doesn't work in Kinshasa. And I think it's because talking about levels of deprivation of living, that before any political claim in a kind of institutionalized way can be made, people have to deal with other things, deeply political things too, and how to survive in the city, how to use that space. But it's a politics of presence and of the demand to be recognized that you exist in the first place, and before any other political demand is being voiced and given form to. And I think that for a long time has been the case, and today we see how that is being reworked towards something else, although typically the political opposition to the current regime is not carried by political parties or institutionalized political formations, but by something like the Catholic Church. And so you revert in a way to an older form of doing politics without calling it politics. But it's a very difficult question, which in the Congolese context at the moment cannot be answered. And so talk about sustainable development and all of these things is far away from people's realities. And now the third question, help me.
The question was the ways in which sutures...
whether the city is ill. As I said, I mean, it's a kind of therapeutic discourse and language that I don't share the pretensions of healing something that is ill. Vulnerology is the science of wound care. I don't see myself, the anthropologist, as a vulnerologist, but I just use the idea, and especially starting from Faustin's dance movements, how you can use a body, for example, to realign space, to reassemble, to create a kind of, in alternative ways, a different kind of world in which you can live. And in that sense, acupuncturing allows us to think, to narrate, to archive, to reassemble the city in a specific kind of way, in hopefully a novel kind of way that leads to a better understanding of what the city is. But, yeah. There was also the question about débrouillardise and so on for Alcinda, but...
Yes. Do you want to keep... How about you keep going and we turn to Jenny's question around the use of suturing?
Yeah, the specific ways of suturing, that of course is the most difficult one to answer. How do people then suture the city together and their own lives in it? And so I'm following the kind of ontological turn, let's say, or assemblage theory, and so although it's not directly in what I write, but thinking about specific, very physical infrastructural things like a pothole, and how that pothole in itself can be seen as a failing infrastructure, something that is lacking, something that is missing, but how at the same time it can be also seen as a possibility. So, for example, a pothole in the road can be, and I always use the example, and I think you've heard it many times, but a pothole underneath a building, and how that pothole doesn't disappear. And I've always wondered why does it remain there? Why don't people repair it to give access to the neighborhood behind that road full of potholes? Until it dawned upon me that everybody around that pothole, actually they were not worried about how to repair it, but how to keep it alive, how to keep it there, because it pushes people to the side, and because of that it creates a public of buyers for the market stalls that popped up around that pothole. Without the pothole, the market wouldn't be there wouldn't be buyers and sellers and so on. And so everybody here knows that from all kinds of African environments, how you have owners of potholes who repair potholes for you. They with a shovel, they fill it up, ask for some money, and make your mobility possible through the city you drive. But the same people at night, of course, empty that pothole again so that they can start the next morning. So the pothole becomes a form of income. And the thing is not how to do away with the pothole, but how to become an owner, how to become an owner of a pothole, and so it's about that. It's about taking possession of that and working it, that impossibility that the pothole represents, how to work that into possibility. So on these kind of very mundane levels, I try to see how, on an everyday level, people do suture in various ways their lives together.
Great. Okay. Thank you. And Alcinda, would you like to pick up on the comment around Jugar and yeah, let's give you a chance, or to pull together any thread that you...
Oh, really? No, I don't have any particular comments to make. Maybe following up on Philippe's description of how the pothole becomes something that can be maximized and used. I'm just thinking of an example of young people I met in Mozambique who make a living in the garbage dump. And using the metaphor of the hole, if we look at the garbage dump as that hole, they make a living by using the garbage dump to find things to sell in the market. They carve their space, they map the space within the garbage dump. Those who arrived first, they don't leave space for others to come. So in a way, it's this kind of a creative reinvention of trying to make the particular situation work for them. And to the colleague from Burkina Faso, well, thank you for that reference. Thank you.
Thank you very much. I would like to say thank you very much to Philippe and to Alcinda, and maybe these metaphors of potholes and mountains and sutures and a little bit of acupuncture are also useful metaphors for thinking about what we're suturing together in this conference and in these conversations as we go through the day. But thank you for kicking us off.
Thank you. So just a few announcements before we do the coffee break. If I could ask Michele to stand up, right at the back, so the stud right inside. Sorry, no reference to your ears, Michele. That should be plural then. So Michele is leading a process to set up a new journal called what's it called? My apologies. Radical Housing Journal. And it is an activist and academic journal in the field of housing struggles and action. It is a feminist and decolonial project, and the first call for proposals is out. So he's desperate for people to come and accost him in the course of the conference if they want to contribute, be involved, and particularly looking for potential African contributors and editors to join the collective. Is that all right? All good? Okay, got it right. Then secondly, please support the book lounge. They are functioning now. And then the events after the end of today, there's the book celebration, which is in your map. That will happen at 5. And then there's the J. Bob's Live performance event, which will be fantastic. So don't miss that. And we hope you will enjoy the rest of today's proceedings. And we see you back for the plenary just after lunch, something like that. Thank you.